Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really powerful foreign policy tool, pure economic force. We're going to unpack the United States' maximum pressure campaign against Iran, how it got started, what it was supposed to do, and the massive shockwaves it sent around the world. It all boils down to this one huge question. If you want another country to change its path, what do you do? Do you negotiate? Do you go to war? Or is there another option? Well, in 2018, the United States decided on that other option, a path of intense, almost overwhelming economic coercion. It was called the Maximum Pressure Campaign, and we're about to look at the anatomy of that decision and, its incredibly complex aftermath.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this campaign, we first have to rewind and see what came before it. Because this story doesn't start with pressure. It actually starts with a deal. That deal was the JCPOA, or the Iran nuclear deal. When it was brokered back in 2015, it was a massive international agreement. The central bargain was pretty straightforward. Iran had to agree to really strict limits on its nuclear program, all verified by inspectors. And in return, the world powers would lift the sanctions that had pretty much crippled its economy.
But man, this deal was controversial from day one, especially in the US. After it was signed, it became this huge political flashpoint. And even though international inspectors kept saying, yep, Iran is holding up its end of the bargain, a new administration was ready to just rip up the whole script. And then, on May 8, 2018, it happened.
The reason for leaving? Well, it was blunt. President Trump didn't mince words. He called it a horrible one-sided deal. This wasn't some minor adjustment. This was the total demolition of a framework that took years of global diplomacy to build.
So the US is out of the deal. What happens next? A brand new strategy was about to step into the spotlight. And that replacement was the Maximum Pressure Campaign. I mean, the name really says it all, doesn't it? The whole idea was to use overwhelming economic sanctions to completely isolate Iran and basically force it back to the negotiating table, only this time it would be on American terms. And the goals were way bigger than the original deal. The administration wasn't just looking for a few tweaks. They wanted a whole new agreement, one that didn't just cover nuclear stuff, but also Iran's ballistic missile program and its military influence all across the Middle East, the whole shebang. And the way they rolled it out, it was like a methodical squeeze. It started right away with new sanctions. Then, 6 months later, all the old sanctions that the nuclear deal had lifted, bam, they snapped right back into place. And finally, the campaign went even further, targeting the very heart of Iran's financial system, trying to cut it off from the world completely. And all that pressure, it had a massive, very real effect. Let's take a look at what this economic squeeze actually did to Iran's economy. The scale of the economic damage was just staggering. Iran's own president at the time, Hassan Rouhani, put a number on it, an estimated $200 billion in lost revenue and investment. For any country, a hit like that is absolutely catastrophic. Data from the IMF paints an even starker picture. Check this out. Iran's official cash reserves, think of it like the country's savings account, took a nosedive from $70 billion in 2017 to just $4 billion by 2020. I mean, the policy was effectively starving the country of capital. But, economic numbers never tell the whole story, do they? The pressure campaign created these profound ripple effects, which led to a really significant human cost and drew a ton of criticism. This quote from Human Rights Watch really gets to the core of the humanitarian argument. Officially, the sanctions had exemptions for things like food and medicine. But the reality on the ground, it was completely different. The financial blockade was so total that it ended up causing what the organization called unnecessary suffering for regular people. So here's how that played out. Because all these international banks are being targeted, it became almost impossible to finance even totally legitimate humanitarian trade. This led to actual documented shortages of life-saving medicines for things like cancer and epilepsy, which directly threatened the health of ordinary Iranians. And this really gets to the heart of the debate over whether the policy actually worked. On one side, you have the stated goal, force a better deal and change Iran's behavior. But on the other side, critics argued it didn't do either of those things. In fact, they said it might have pushed Iran to become more aggressive, not less. An analyst from the Atlantic Council summed up this critique perfectly. When you have a policy that's all stick and no carrot, all pressure with no clear way out, no diplomatic off-ramp, you essentially leave a country with no choice but to push back, to fight fire with fire. Now, this whole maximum pressure campaign didn't happen in a vacuum. The decision to ditch the JCPOA and go all in on sanctions, it created a major rift in the international community.
The policy definitely had powerful supporters. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who had been a critic of the nuclear deal for a long time, called the withdrawal a bold decision and threw his full support behind America's new, much tougher stance.
But, and this is a big but, America's closest European allies, who also signed the deal, were completely against it. France, Germany, and the UK put out a joint statement basically saying, hey, this agreement is still legally binding. For them, the US was walking away from a deal that was actually working.
And that deep divide wasn't just international, it was happening right inside the United States. Former President Barack Obama, whose administration negotiated the deal in the first place, came out and directly contradicted the new policy. He said the deal was working and that it served American interests. It was a really sharp break from one administration to the next.
So this decision effectively drew new lines in the sand. You had one camp with Israel and key Gulf Arab states who were all for the pressure campaign. And in the other camp, literally every single other party to the original deal, the EU, Russia, China, who were all against it. It was an incredibly polarizing move.
And all of this leads us to one final, really challenging question. The maximum pressure campaign was a clear bet on economic warfare over an international agreement. And it forces us to ask, when a nation decides to trade a diplomatic framework for unilateral pressure, what is the ultimate price? Not just for the country being targeted,